Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This amendment is drawn from the text of H.R. 4159, the America Competes Reauthorization Act of 2014. I introduced this bill last year along with every Democratic member of the committee as original co-sponsors. Mr. Chairman, this is a real reauthorization of the Competes Act. This amendment, if adopted, will set us back on course to keep America the world leader in science and innovation. That was the vision of the National Academy's report, Rising Above the Gathering Storm. That was the vision of the original Competes Act, which was supported by both the Democratic and Republican members of Congress and signed into law by a Republican president. And that is the vision of this amendment. I will briefly hit the high points of what this amendment would do. First, it sets our science agencies on a sustainable growth path and authorizes those agencies for 5 years to give them the predictability and stability they need. This substitute amendment also includes the Department of Energy programs included in the original Competes Act. Inclusion of these programs was one of the key recommendations in the Rising Above the Gathering Storm report, and I haven't heard any legitimate reason for the majority for dropping them. DOE's Office of Science is the nation's largest funder of basic research in the physical sciences, and its continued growth and its support is just as critical to our nation's future competitiveness as our other science agencies are. The substitute amendment also includes a larger focus on STEM education and innovation programs, which were both major components of the original Competes Act as well as the 2010 reauthorization. Just as important as what is in this substitute amendment is what is not in here. This amendment contains none of the unnecessary and antagonistic language found in the majority's bill regarding the National Science Foundation's merit review process or scientific misconduct procedures. Those provisions in the majority's bill have been universally criticized by the outside stakeholder community, and for good reason. They send the message that our nation's scientists can't be trusted and our premier science agency cannot manage itself. Nothing could be further from the truth. NSF is widely seen as the most efficient and trusted stewards of grant monies, and the proof is in the pudding. NSF-funded research has resulted in countless innovations and discoveries that have spawned whole new industries and been a key driver of our innovation economy. Also not in this bill are specific allocations for NSF's research directorates. Let's be clear. The majority included those allocations in their bill for one reason only, to cut funding for the kinds of sciences they don't like. This is a terrible step in the wrong direction. The majority is injecting politics into the decisions about what science is to fund. And I cannot support such a move, and I'm not alone. Almost every scientific organization or society that has commented on the majority's bill has criticized these allocations. We have a choice today. We can support the original version of the National Academies that was carried forth in a bipartisan fashion by a Democratic chair and a Republican president, or we can cede our future to our international competitors. They aren't sitting around debating the value of increased investments in research and development. They are making those investments and are catching up with the U.S. It's time for us to act, and I ask support for this amendment, and I yield back.
Okay. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to thank Ms. Lofgren for her important amendment. This amendment goes to the heart of why the entire scientific and business community is so disappointed in First Act. The First Act takes decision-making for where meritorious research is to be found taken to be found out of the hands of scientists and into the hands of politicians. The last time that Congress saw fit to authorize NSF by directorate was in 1998. That was the last century. Under both Republican and Democratic chairmen since then, our colleagues have been wise enough to leave scientific decision-making in the hands of scientists. Today, some of my colleagues appear to believe that they are expert enough to know not just what research is cutting edge, but what will yield important results for our national health, security, and prosperity. Even scientists don't know in advance what research will yield important results and what groundbreaking advances come from all fields of science and engineering supported by NSF, including the social scientists. We should not be arbitrarily cutting the social sciences and geosciences because we think we are the experts in those fields and know better than the actual experts. Nor should we be cutting those research areas to further particular political agendas. And we should not be reinforcing disciplinary boundaries and turf battles that our current and former colleagues were wise enough to step back from the past 15 years. We are in the 21st century. Let's not send science back to the 20th century. The first act, as written, impedes NSF's ability to promote the most meritorious research. I support Ms. Lofgren's amendment, and it is an important corrective measure, and I urge its adoption.
And thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I thank the gentleman for this good amendment. One of my primary concerns regarding this bill is the anemics funding. This amendment would raise the funding levels by 3.5% a year and 2% increases over the rate of inflation. 3.5% a year would be a true compromise. The first act contains funding increases of 1.5 or less below the rate of inflation, and the Democratic Competes bill contains a 5% increase. While I truly believe that a 5% increase is what is needed to not only shore up, but grow our science and innovation capacity. And I know that we are in a tough budgetary environment, and no matter what we spend or don't spend, it's not going to affect Medicare and Medicaid. That's going to be affected when we increase jobs. And this is the kind of legislation that brings about innovation and jobs. And I can strongly support a 3.5% a year increase for the next several years. This amendment would also strike the Research Directorate level funding allocations for NSF from the bill. And you'll hear from majority that NSF used to be authorized by Research Directorate. They are right, but the last time it was done was in 1998. This committee stopped doing it for a reason. NSF is a bottoms-up agency in the sense that it responds to scientific developments in near real-time funds in time and funds the best ideas regardless of what area of science they come from. Drawing such hard and fast lines between the various directorates, as the majority proposes, reinforces the 20th century department field-centered model for science, and I'm afraid that the majority included it in their bill so that they could pick and choose the science that they believe in and that they believe is important rather than allowing the experts to make these decisions. This amendment would also extend the authorization period through 2016. One of the _1 requests I hear from the scientific community is certainty in funding. Moving a 2-year halfway through the first fiscal year and after the President's budget has been released for the subsequent year is no help in practical terms or in messaging. The Competes Act was about vision, and if you look up on this wall here, it tells you exactly without vision people perish. I'm afraid that the first act, with its current year-and-a-half authorization, is just short-sightedly. I wholeheartedly urge the adoption of this amendment and say the only way you get rid of Medicaid is to educate and train people, and innovation will bring them some jobs. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I'd like to commend Ms. Edwards for her amendment. As Ms. Edwards pointed out, the substance of Section 106 has been hugely unpopular in the research community, and the feedback from them has been universally negative. The fact that the majority kept this provision despite this negative feedback makes me wonder if they really listen to stakeholders, which we all are elected to represent. My colleagues in the majority are quite fond of finding research grants with peculiar titles and waving them around as poor positive that NSF is wasting money. That's the proof of it. This sad practice is nothing new, but the current majority has taken this tactic a step further with their recent actions. Now, in addition to their uninformed criticism, the majority has been bombarding NSF with document requests for confidential merit review materials for scores of research grants, much of which they've had nothing to do with. But given the chair's proclivity to issue subpoenas when agencies don't respond to his inappropriate document request, I'm concerned that subpoenas could be issued if they fail to turn over peer reviews each and every note. And all this in the absence of any credible allegations of fraud or mismanagement of the grants process of NSF. Congress has a legitimate oversight role, and I take that role seriously. But these actions are something else. They amount to nothing more than harassment. The National Science Foundation has already turned over scores of confidential documents, and I have pictures that I sat right here and took of all those stacks of paper. And I have no expectation that the majority will do anything with those documents or the thousands of additional pages they're requesting. I guess there's more than one way to skin a cat. But all of the majority's different efforts to attack the social sciences strike me as a bit excessive. So let's adopt Ms. Edwards' amendment and take one line attack off the table. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know you understand. I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson.